No, you'd never get away with it now. And I was tiny too, but not a lot of weight, not like me now. So you had 12 crates of milk and grapefruit juice and anything else, and cream, and you'd go down and the hills of Kandala, and the top of the main street that's got all the shops on. You'd start at the top and hope like hell you had enough weight to stop the thing at the bottom by the fire station.
Never do that now, Martin Bosley. All right, wonderful show. Thank you. Take tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. Smoke and mirrors or a policy winner? Labour's plans to vanish thousands of vape stores in a post-election crackdown. We talk to a health advocate and an industry rep. What's the local fish and chippy got to do with battling truancy in Northland schools? Well, a local principal will explain all. He's got some reckons on vaping too. Chris Hipkins comes out swinging after a political poll signals a red alert for Labour. Electric ferries are floated for Auckland commuter services vacated by Fullers, and the AI tool that can suss out the real age of your ticker, including wear and tear for laziness and overindulgence. Maybe we don't want to know that. Anyway, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Menga Pitu Kōrero ko Anna Thomas Tene. People had to be treated in ambulances outside Waikato Hospital in Hamilton last night after the emergency department was swamped with patients. St John issued a special declaration to keep ambulance services to the hospital operating. Its second such in a month. Emma Stanford has the story.
At 10:30 last night, St John had to work with ambulance staff to set up an ambulance waiting area. It prioritised getting the most urgent patients to ED while ensuring those waiting in ambulances had appropriate care. Te Whatu Ora Waikato says it reached 103% occupancy during the day yesterday, and by 6 p.m. there were 143 patients in the ED, one of the busiest periods it has experienced. Earlier this month, a provisional improvement notice was issued to Waikato Hospital's ED after concerns about unsafe staffing levels.
ACT leader David Seymour is dismissing the National Party's move to disavow his climate and treaty policies. Last night's One News Varian poll showed the National ACT right bloc have the numbers to comfortably form the next government. Senior Labour MPs are questioning what this would mean for Māori, given ACT wants to create new laws that supersede the Treaty of Waitangi. National has poured cold water on the idea, with its leader, Christopher Luxon, saying it's not party policy, though he is opposed to co-governance in public services. David Seymour says this just confirms why people should support ACT.
All I'd say is that I haven't actually had the election yet. The power's with the voters. Now they can see if they want real change on these important issues, they've got to give their party vote to ACT.
Christopher Luxon has today definitively ruled out ACT's proposal to repeal the Zero Carbon Act. National says it supports steps the government is taking to further crack down on youth vaping. Rules around banning new stores from setting up near schools and reducing the nicotine concentration in vapes will come in next month. Labour is also campaigning to limit the number of vape stores nationwide and introduce a licensing regime for all retailers, including dairies, which want to sell vapes. National's health spokesperson Dr Shane Reti says vaping has brought down the adult smoking rates but become a gateway for young people.
Their general direction of travel, as they've announced it to us, and indeed over their previous announcements from June 6th or June 7th, I think was their first sort of substantive vaping announcement, we're generally supportive of that direction of travel.
However, Dr Shane Reti says the government has a track record on acting slowly to address vaping regulations. It's not yet clear what led to 2 people being helicoptered off Mount Hutt skifield late this morning. The first person was airlifted in a serious condition to Christchurch Hospital. 2 minutes later, another person was airlifted from the skifield. Mount Hutt has been approached for further information. Drivers doing skids and burnouts outside a Christchurch zoo are seriously harming some of the animals, and police have launched a crackdown. They say the behaviour outside Orana Wildlife Park has caused serious injuries and harm to some animals and significant stress for staff. And they warn it's also an extreme fire risk to the park. Police have identified 16 vehicles involved in offending and have also so far impounded 10. The Inter-Islander has cancelled more sailings on its Kaitaki ferry after its bow door was damaged on Monday by a large wave while crossing from Picton to Wellington. Sailings were cancelled today and that will now extend to Wednesday afternoon. KiwiRail General Manager Duncan Roy says the Aratiri ferry is running an additional return sailing today and Thursday. There are freight-only sailings. To sports, and the All Blacks forwards coach Jason Ryan says they won't be holding anything back against South Africa this weekend as they look to maintain winning momentum ahead of the World Cup. Some teams appear to be keeping some tricks up their sleeve for the global tournament and haven't shown all their cards during recent test matches. Ryan says the All Blacks want to continue their unbeaten season and he's not concerned about what they might reveal to other teams.
We've showed plenty of our game, and as other teams have, you still got to get those momentum shifts and those big pressure moments, which I think are quite important in test matches, especially this time of year, heading into that World Cup, which is right here now.
Sprinter Zoe Hobbs has missed out on the 100 metres final at the World Athletics Championships in Hungary by the finest of margins. Hobbs finished fourth in her semi-final with the 10th fastest time. However, she says it was disappointing, missing qualification by 1/100th of a second.
I was drawn a very stacked semi, and as it turns out, it was the fastest semi that we've had in history. So to have executed in the race where it mattered most, I'm very happy with.
And Shah Carey Richardson of the United States went on to win the 100 metres gold medal, finishing ahead of the Jamaican pair of Sharika Jackson and Shelley Ann Fraser-Price. And a recurrence of an old injury hampered pole vaulter Eliza McCartney, who failed to record a height, while the other two New Zealanders in the field, Olivia McTaggart and Imogen Aris, also both failed to qualify for the final. And that's the news.
Labor puts on a brave face as they continue to slide in the polls.
The voter sentiment ultimately is a bit grumpy towards the government, and I can understand a lot of that.
Plans to curb vape stores fall short for some.
Because they're only talking about specialist vape stores. These are the stores that are the dedicated ones. We've had 71 of those open in the last 77 days.
And a rare penguin makes its way home.
We are hoping like crazy that he is just heading full speed back to New Zealand.
Full speed ahead. Morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, partly cloudy with isolated showers. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mostly fine with areas of morning frost. The chance of a shower in Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy with isolated showers from the Wairoa district northwards, clearing overnight. Partly cloudy tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, fine spells increasing tomorrow. The South Island, excluding Fiordland and Stewart Island, mostly fine with morning frosts, cloud increasing in Westland tomorrow evening. For Fiordland and Stewart Island, becoming cloudy this evening with drizzle or light rain developing tonight. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain clearing tonight and then cloudy periods. RNZ National, it is 7 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi ana, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Labour's vape election policy is about putting the horse back in the stable, according to the Prime Minister. But some critics say it's already well and truly bolted. If it's still in government post-election, Labour will cap the number of stores selling vapes to 600 nationwide, down from several thousand. All vape retailers, including dairies, will need to be licensed, and penalties for retailers selling to underage children will jump from $10,000 to $15,000. That is on top of new rules announced in June that ban new specialty vape stores setting up within 300 metres of marae and schools and capping maximum nicotine levels. Joining us now to discuss the plan is Health Coalition Aotearoa's co-chair, Professor Boyd Swinburne. Kia ora, Boyd.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Is it possible to lasso the horse and get it back in the stable on this one?
Yeah, in bits and pieces, isn't it? There's really is a catch-up job, and I think what Labor has brought out, both in government and their policies for next year, is trying to close that stable door in stages. And we do have to be mindful that, vaping still offers an opportunity for people to quit. But it is this rapid rise over the last few years of youth smoking that has really been a problem. So it's now up to over 10%. And a third of those kids have never smoked before. So this is a sort of a vape issue, which is beyond helping people quit smoking. And
who needs to take responsibility for that, Boyd? Because that stat is from the ASH survey, I believe, that you've quoted. And we're talking about 14-year-olds, right? Never smoked before, and they're using vapes. Who stuffed up?
Well, this was a sluggish government response, I have to say. There's a few years that we didn't have any regulations on the books, and the vape shops just sprouted up like mushrooms, and dairies cut themselves in half to be able to sell vapes because they have such a high profit margin that it makes it kind of bit irresistible, really. And so now we're having to deal with reversing that trend, which is much harder than having to prevent it in the first place.
What is your expectation around speed of culling these shops and closing them down? So the Labor is saying a cap of 600 vape sellers nationwide if it's still in after the election. There are thousands of these stores right now.
There are, but the government is going to have to take a tough stance on this, and if that means closing down vape stores, then that's what is going to have to happen. I mean, that's going to happen with tobacco anyway. That's part of the government's regulations on smoke-free, which is really important. And so because we're late at it, that's not the preferred way to go. It would have been good to prevent it in the first place, but we are going to have to do that, I think.
Licensing for everybody selling vapes. What would you like that regime to look like?
Yes, I think, well, it's hard to know what the details are. But
they don't have any right now. They say it's up to the ministry to work it out and how it will be administered. So in your best case scenario, Boyd, do you have an idea of what you would like to see?
Well, I think licensing gives a lot stronger leverage for the ministry or for government to be able to control this, because people who then break the law, they sell to underage kids, they can have their licences withdrawn, and the penalties can apply both to the business and to the person that sold it. So that will be quite a powerful deterrent. I think that could be quite effective.
So what do you reckon? One strike and you're out, no licence again after that?
Yeah, well, I think that it has been shown to be a powerful deterrent, and, a $15,000 fine, $10,000 fine is not insubstantial, and I think that will be a major deterrent.
The vape industry is saying that reducing access to vapes will create a black market for cigarettes and vapes, and that in Australia there has been a substantial jump in youth vaping via the black market in response to a crackdown on vaping. What is your response to that?
Yeah, so I think that's true, that there are other avenues for people to get vapes, and so this is not going to be a single policy that's going to close the door on everything. So we do have to look at black markets, we do have to look at outlets, we do have to look at enforcement and age limits and all that sort of thing. So if we can just focus on what the steps that are plausible at the time, that would be great.
So the government, under the government banner, announced policy changes in June regarding vapes, right?
Yep.
About proximity to marae, disposable vapes. I mean, presumably, all of this information that we've discussed, which was in that ASH survey, was available to the government when they made these changes. Why wouldn't they include the ones they've made now, do you think?
Well, I think the pressure is mounting, isn't it? I mean, I think there's the parents' movement, there's principles that are coming out against it, there's the hashtag group of rangatahi from Wainuiamata. We supported them in presenting a petition with over 12,000 signatures to the government and Parliament last week. So I think there's a growing movement and a growing angst about it. So I think this is appropriate that they do move in what ways that they can. And yet you could say they should have done more earlier, and we'd agree with that.
Appreciate your time, Boyd. That is Professor Boyd Swinburne, who's the co-chair of the Health Coalition Aotearoa. There, 12 minutes after 5. Let us know your thoughts on that. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Labor's plan to crack down on vaping further if they're still in after the election. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Labour leader Chris Hipkins is putting on a brave face as support for his party continues to drop, promising to fight back during the upcoming election campaign. Its party vote is now in the danger zone into the 20s, with National pulling away with an 8-point lead on 37. Under the One News variant poll, Labour, the Greens, its Pāti Māori would get 55 seats. National and ACT would comfortably secure a majority of 65. But the pressure's also coming on National leader Christopher Luxon to start talking about what the government might look like. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Chris Hipkins staying positive in light of a devastating poll for Labour.
Obviously we'd like to be higher, but we've still got the whole campaign ahead of us.
Plunging into the 20s in the latest poll, Labour's looking to change up its game.
We're going to be fighting back.
His colleagues acknowledging recent controversies, but not throwing in the towel just yet.
There's no doubt we've had some challenges in the last couple of months.
It's definitely been a difficult time.
You've had 6 years in government.
Have you met somebody who's been polled?
Campaign's only just starting.
But a sense of momentum among National MPs.
Obviously pretty positive for National.
It's good, there's obviously a mood for change.
There's a long way to go and we've got to work very, very hard to be in government.
What really matters is what happens on October the 14th.
The ACT Party wants to pass a Treaties Principle Act that would supersede the Treaty of Waitangi and its implications in other legislation and the way laws are interpreted in the courts. Christopher Luxon says that's not a position backed by National.
That's something that's not our policy and we don't support that.
And he's ruling out another ACT policy to repeal the Zero Carbon Act, which sets the targets and provides the framework for New Zealand's emissions reductions.
Absolutely not. I mean, we believe very strongly in net zero 2050. The means by which we deliver those goals will be different from the government, but we are deeply, deeply committed to that.
The two leaders going toe-to-toe in the House.
Is the Prime Minister seriously saying that he and I should get free prescriptions rather than giving Kiwis battling cancer access to drugs that are here, available in Australia but not here in New Zealand?
The other public services New Zealanders rely on is more important than tax cuts for millionaires.
Labour's rolling on its attack lines. Christopher Luxon has some favourites of his own.
We're going to have a strong, stable, National-led government that's going to focus on fixing the economy so we reduce the economic pain and suffering for New Zealanders. On the other side, you've got actually Labour, Te Pāti Māori, the Greens and Harry Tam and the gangs. That is a coalition of chaos.
Parties are promising a clean campaign, prompting questions to National's Deputy Leader Nicola Willis about including gangs in that tagline.
Well, the facts are that the mongrel mob are out there endorsing the Labor Party as the party that people should vote for, and if the mongrel mob's endorsing you, I think that's a pretty good sign.
Another common question today was about potential working relationships with New Zealand First and leader Winston Peters. He's already ruled out Labour, and its leader Chris Hipkins says any governing arrangement after the election would be a very, 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 very long shot. But he'll outline his party's formal position in the next few weeks. As for National, Christopher Luxon once again dismissed questions, saying New Zealand First is not in Parliament and not polling above the crucial 5% threshold.
Political editor Jane Patterson there. Northland schools are trying to hook truants back into class by targeting their parents at the local chippy, among other things. Education Minister Jan Tinetti has today highlighted figures showing regular attendance at schools nationwide has gone from just under 40% in Term 2 last year to almost 60% in Term 1 of this year. The Minister says the improvements are due to the government's rapid response to improving attendance, including an additional 80 full and part-time attendance officers on the job now, and a regional response fund. Northland school attendance rates were hovering around 48% in Term 1. But Tai Tukaro, Principals Association President and Principal at Hura Hura Primary School in Whangarei, Pat Newman, says the changes they've made are starting to work.
Look, I think everywhere has still got students that need to be in schools. And Northland's actually probably seen some resounding successes. And I've got to be straight. Yes, the attendance officers and the attendance services may have had something to do with it, but a hell of a lot of it more has been to do with the funding we have received that has allowed us to do regional and localised and school-based initiatives. And that has definitely worked in the north, and we're seeing all sorts of interesting things being tried that wouldn't be possible without that funding. I think the Minister alluded to the work that's been done by his teachers and principals and ministry, but that only tells half the story. The amount of effort that have been put in right around the country, especially up here, has been the reason that it's been successful.
So, in terms of the kids who are frequently away, what are your numbers?
I'm just talking about my own school. I'm down to 15% yesterday of the school who are attending below 60%.
And is that an improvement for you?
Oh, massive, absolutely massive. And the same with, I think, around, if we start to talk about the positive ones attending, we're hitting close to more sort of 85 to 90% most weeks. That's on the percentage basis. And I think you'll find that's fairly similar over the north.
So what do you think is the biggest driver in getting kids back in school for you guys?
The biggest driver, without any doubt, is that we're raising community expectations and a community awareness. There is no doubt about it. It's also about encouraging kids to want to come to school because they're missing out, that it's fun, that they're learning, that they're safe, and safety comes into it in a huge way. Lots of kids particularly worry about the cyber bullying stuff. Lots of kids worry about catching diseases now because of the COVID stuff. But it's about community awareness. There is no doubt about it. The thumping on a door saying you will be at school or else does not work, because they know it doesn't work. But the knocking on a door and saying, how can we help you get your children to school, works. It's getting the aunties to say to, is kind of thing, hey, listen, we know our nephews and nieces aren't at school. What can we do to help you to get them there? It's about the neighbour looking over the fence and saying, listen, do you want your kids to walk with my kids to school, and and they can go in company. It's all those little initiatives. We've started things like some of us are advertising on what's called Google TV, which is in the fish and chip shops and all the other shops around, about getting back to school. We're
Hang on a
looking
minute,
at
Pat. Tell me about that. So you are advertising in the local chippy in takeaway joints. What are you saying in those ads?
the 10-second ad. 40 in Whangarei. There's 40 screens. They get 30 exposures of 10 seconds each. I don't know if I should use the word exposure. 30 screenings a day on each screen, so that's 1,200 of them for 10 seconds saying, hey, it doesn't cost, basically, get back to school. It doesn't cost anything. You get free lunch, free this, you know what I mean? We're encouraging. The next one that we're looking at putting up is around if your kid's not at school, it's important that you ring in for the child's safety. So we're using that. I'm looking also at the fridge magnets, all that sort of carry on. And we're still using...
What will a fridge magnet do? Pat, what are you going to say on the fridge magnet?
Ring the school if your child's away for their safety, I think is the message I'll be putting on it.
And do you think all those little incremental things actually work?
Yes, they do. We've got the evidence. The idea, as I said, of thumping on doors doesn't. But then I've got to admit, though, we have, again, a percentage below that 30% throughout New Zealand, but up here as well, that will take intensive help and work to get back to school, all right? There's quite a few long-term kids that have been out, and that they don't just come back for what we're talking about with fridge magnets and Google TV, but we hope to get the majority back that way.
Hey, Pat, before you go, can you tell me whether vaping is a problem for your kids at your school?
It started to be, and I'm a primary school. We started to have kids bringing them. I have a very strict policy. I take the damn things and throw them in the rubbish. And I don't care whether someone wants to say I've stolen them or not. I do it. And on top of that, I ring the parent, and sometimes I get astounded when the parent says, oh, yes, I vape, and I let them do it at home. and I can't do much about that, but sort of sigh and think, my God, no wonder. But yeah, there's not so much a problem in here because we act on it. But I would think, and I would not think, I know in some of the schools, the higher schools, the intermediate, so high schools, it is a problem.
And that is Pat Newman, Tai Tukaro Principals Association President there. 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, but do get in touch about vaping and Labor's proposal post-election to cut the number of vape stores, that specialist in any other store selling vapes, down to 600 nationwide. Currently there are thousands of them, so they're planning to tighten up the regulations. Your thoughts on that one? And also truancy, some local initiatives there in Northland trying to get parents to send their kids to school on a more regular basis. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines with Anna now. Anna, mina pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. The government set out further restrictions on vaping if it's re-elected, capping the number of specialist stores at 600 nationally, licensing all vape retailers and promising big fines for selling to children. Health Coalition Aotearoa co-chair Professor Boyd Swinburne told Checkpoint the government appeared to be reacting to pressure and could have done more earlier. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says Labour will run a vigorous election campaign in spite of a new poll giving the party a 29% share and putting a National and ACT bloc in government. Meanwhile, National has been stressing its differences with ACT, saying it doesn't support its plan to redefine the Treaty of Waitangi or its proposal to repeal the Zero Carbon Act. St John says last night's major incident declaration at Waikato Hospital was its second in a month. Te Whatu Ora Waikato says by 6 p.m. there were 143 patients in the ED, one of the busiest periods it has experienced. Some patients were treated in ambulances. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Facebook's decision to block news during devastating wildfires is putting profits ahead of people's safety. Facebook and Instagram have stopped publishing news in Canada because of a new law that would force them to share their profits with news outlets. And the Inter-Islander says Kaitaki ferry cancellations will continue into tomorrow afternoon. A large wave damaged the ferry's bow door on Monday as it sailed from Picton to Wellington. Those are the headlines, Lisa.
Thank you, Anna. Former Rugby World Cup winning coach Steve Hansen has hosed down some initial shock at news he's helping out the Wallabies. Yep, helping the Wallabies. Hansen has agreed to offer some guidance to the Australian side ahead of the upcoming Rugby World Cup in France. Linking up with coach Eddie Jones, veteran All Black hooker Dane Coles didn't initially believe it.
Yeah, I'm actually gobsmacked. He's a bit of an icon in the All Black setup and he's a great man. And, I'm actually gobsmacked. I thought you guys were having a bit of a laugh, but I suppose you can help out Eddie. Hopefully he doesn't tell Eddie all our secrets, but I think he'll be respectful.
And we're joined now by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, Felicity, let's have some context around this situation.
Well, once word got out, Steve Hansen was very quick to give ZB a call and offer a little bit of an explanation. So from what we understand, it's only actually a couple of days that he'll be with the Wallabies. It's an unpaid role. He's not there as a coach or consultant or anything like that. He's there purely as an observer. So he says this will involve him looking at the Australian players and coach Eddie Jones and offering feedback to Jones, which you mean Jones would probably be wise to take some feedback at this point. He's not had a win with the Wallabies. He's turning up to a World Cup with sort of a mixed up coaching staff as well. So he's probably relied on this friendship that he's had with Hansen over quite a long time, and he's called on him, and he's quite an experienced guy, right? So have this person around. And for all of Coles' surprise about this, it's actually All Blacks coach Ian Foster did actually know about this. Hansen said he'd been in touch with him to let him know, and basically, I guess, to assure him that he wasn't going to be letting out those secrets that Coles was so protective of there. And it'll be that Hansen will actually be at the Wallabies France warm-up game, which is like the final warm-up game. But France are actually the All Blacks' first opponent at the World Cup. So he's saying if anything he notices from France, he will actually be handing that information over to Ian Foster as well. So he's kind of couching it as, I can be helpful to you too. And, it's not like Kiwis haven't been involved with the Wallabies before. Robbie Deans, most recently Dave Rennie.
But he's giving our Aussie cousins a leg up.
And exactly, maybe he's got a little bit of a different connection to New Zealand rugby than these two other people have had as well, which is maybe why there's a little bit more shock around it. And, despite this not actually appearing to be a real defection, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins does have a joking suggested way that we should perhaps punish Steve Hansen.
I think we should cancel his citizenship. No, that's a joke, just to be very clear.
Prime Minister, is there any...
Politicians and jokes, they need to be careful in the lead up to the election. OK, let's move on to the New Zealand sprinter Zoe Hobbs. Oh my goodness me, she's missed out on the World Champs 100-metre final by just a sliver.
Agonisingly close. So
yeah.
100th of a second. So that was in her semi-final. She was part of a semi-final that was actually the fastest in history for women. So she finished fourth in that semi-final, which gave her the 10th fastest time overall. So she ran in 11.02. And so to get into the top 9, it's that 100th of a second was the difference. That before she could be running she's had quite a good year and she would have wanted to be running in this final as well. And that was actually won by American Sha'Carri Richardson, who, after 3 years of promise, has finally shown up and got a gold medal. This is the person that missed the Olympics because she tested positive for cannabis and then failed to qualify for the World Championships held in America last year. So for her, it's a little bit of a redemption. She ran 10.65 and had to do it the hard way, going from lane 9 to cross over and get her gold medal. And she finished ahead of 2 Jamaicans as well. So a little bit of a tough start to the World Champs for New Zealand, but sure, Zoe Hobbs will be back. She's also already qualified for the Olympics, so maybe that's on her mind.
I have to say, watching the World Champs, the athletics has been absolutely exhilarating.
Gripping, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely gripping. Thank you, Felicity. That is Felicity Reid with sport. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of it coming in on vape stores. This person says, we've had kids as young as 6 and 8 bringing vapes into school. Where are they getting those from, I wonder? Interested in your thoughts. Tell us, 2101 if you know the person who sent us that. Gary says, I'm disappointed with Labour's vape policy as it's not new policy. Shane says it wasn't that long ago that the then Minister of Health was trumpeting the introduction of vaping in order to reduce cigarette smoking, despite health professionals and advocates warning that this would see young people take up vaping. It's going to see intergenerational harm, says Shane. Do keep your feedback coming on that one, 2101 on text and tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 5:30, kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and it is, of course, time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. She joins me in the studio to talk all things business. Let's start with wind farms. Solar farms, actually, not wind, solar. Genesis Energy and a joint venture partner, FRV Australia, plan to make a significant investment in solar farms. Who are these FRV peeps?
Yeah, it's an Australian, big Australian company that specialises in this area. They're going to spend about $600 million on this investment. And it's going to be big. It's will be spread over 740 hectares, Manawatu, Waikato, Hawke's Bay. And that's going to generate enough electricity for about 85,000 homes when it's all said and done. It's a big deal, though. I mean, in terms of scope and scale, etc. It will make them, I guess, Genesis, the biggest solar farm provider in New Zealand when it's all said and done. They also have another program that's underway or getting underway in Canterbury. It's an 80 gigawatt hour of electricity. It will produce that much per year. And again, with the developments that they're planning in the North Island, that's going to be 680 gigawatt hours. That's a lot. I mean, it's big.
So you could run your hairdryer for a while.
Yeah, and I mean, the sheep can still graze under those solar panels, so it's,
dual use.
Dual use. There you go.
Okay, let's talk about honey. This is the exporter Comvita, and it's reported a record full year revenue. Where is the growth coming from?
China. Yeah. Well, not surprising. The Chinese love the honey. Now, interestingly, their profit fell 13% to 11.1 million. Now, the company's been spending a lot of money on what they call enterprise resource software. And what it does, I guess, is it's supposed to eliminate a lot of their manual labor type jobs. So it will streamline, and they expect it to be a material saving. So this year they spent $3 million in the year that just passed, and this year coming, that will end in June 2024, they're going to spend another $7 million. So it's a lot of money for this thing. And but the chief executive thinks it's going to make a big difference to the company in terms of its productivity. I asked him where the growth was going to come from in the future. He said that where they sell their honey, they in most markets, they've just got 1% of households buying their honey. But in their best market, they're selling it to 3% of households. And they say that would be huge growth if they could get to that. It doesn't sound like much difference between 1% and 3%, but it's big. So, yeah, Comvita.
And market for today?
Okay, so we ended up 0.25% up, which was good. 27-point gain to 11,485. We've been seeing some downside more recently. And certainly in China, that's what we're seeing as well. It's still difficult in Asia. That Chinese economic data is still upsetting the market, and fears that the U.S. Will hike interest rates again. So the dollar was little change, still quite weak, 59.3 U.S. cents, 92.4 Australian, and 46.4 British pence.
Thank you, Nona, I think. Nona Peltier there with Business News. Ka kite. Those concerned about vaping restrictions say the measures proposed by Labor today aren't good enough and might not even happen. Labor says it would slash the number of vape stores to 600 nationwide if re-elected. The Prime Minister's gone a step further and said any existing vape retailers within 300 metres of schools and marae may be forced to close. Ashley McCall reports.
Vape Free Kids NZ only last week took to the steps of Parliament to deliver a petition with 13,000 signatures calling for tougher restrictions on vapes. Its spokesperson, Tammy Downer, says the problem is just getting kicked down the road.
This won't even happen unless they get elected, and then by then it will also take time to implement as it goes through legislation. We've got a massive issue today, and the families that are struggling with this issue don't have any support or anywhere to go because the cessation services are for people that are smoking.
Latest Asthma Foundation data shows around 20% of young people under 18 vape regularly. Labor leader Chris Hipkins has ruled out making vapes available for pharmacy use only, saying it would be another hurdle for smokers to transition to vapes. But Ms Downer says it would help drop the youth vaping rate.
Always the biggest risk. The smokers having to go a bit further to get smokes, or the amount of kids picking up vaping, daily at the moment with the availability as it is.
She says there's still potentially more than 6,000 retailers that aren't specialist stores available, such as dairies and petrol stations. If Labor's re-elected, all retailers, including these stores, will need to have a licence to be able to sell vape products. Hapaite Hawara interim CEO Jason Alexander says while the move will be great if it goes ahead, he wants to also see restrictions on where vape stores are placed.
We do see a concentration in some of our poorest neighbourhoods, which isn't surprising. It sort of follows trends that we've seen with alcohol outlets and the like in the past. So we do need to make sure that we don't have a concentration of vape stores in our highest deprivation areas.
Dairy and Business Owners Group Chair Sunny Koshal has slammed the move by Labor, calling it a war on dairies.
This is a panic-based policy making. You know who is going to be the biggest loser in this scenario? It will be the smoke-free 2025 year right. Vaping is the biggest weapon we had to stop smoking in New Zealand.
Labor says it will also look into retailer display regulations to make vape products less visible and attractive from the storefront.
And joining us now is the Vaping Industry Association of New Zealand Chair, Jonathan Devery. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thanks. Why do you think Labor has announced this policy now?
I think it's a desperate policy by a struggling government looking to leverage an emotive issue with parents for votes. And the real issue is the policy lacks any evidence-based research to suggest that it will even tackle the youth vaping issue.
In your media statement, you say it's an attempt to score political points after polling disastrously. Do you really think they just whipped this one out of their back pocket after one bad poll last night?
I do. Yeah, I do. They have no evidence to support that what their policy is is supposed to represent. The evidence suggests that 7.6% of youth access vaping products from retailers and online, squashing vaping retailers down to 600 or retailers who actually support vaping products. So it's not just attacking specialist vape retailers, it's reducing the total number of outlets that have vaping products down to 600, is not going to achieve the purpose.
Won't it? By limiting supply? Their purpose is to limit supply and cutting down from thousands of stores to a few hundred. How won't that cut supply?
Because the research shows only 7.6% of youth actually access products from vaping retailers or dairies. So the supply issue is not with the industry itself. It's with 75% of youth are accessing these products through social sources. So friends, family, products being supplied by individuals who are over 18 years old, not industry. So that's a real issue that they're failing to address and wrap their heads around.
So what should they do about that, do you think, Jonathan, if not cutting the number of vape stores?
That's above my pay grade. That's an educational piece. The Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health actually need to talk to the public health sector and talk to us as industry, and we can provide information and lean on each other's resources and knowledge to try and put something in place that prevents youth access. The industry does not want youth accessing these products. It's from a commercial perspective, is at the detriment of industry, because we just end up in this exact environment where we have tighter regulations that make no sense and are not going to solve the issue. So,
well, they could just ban vapes altogether then.
They could ban vapes altogether, but then, New Zealand has the fastest falling smoking rates in the Western world because of the ease of access and the current regulations supporting vaping products as a safer alternative to smokers. So suddenly our smoking rates begin to incline. 50% of children in a household where mum or dad smoke will smoke. So there's a huge issue around smoking. We need to support vaping as a smoking cessation product, make sure that we limit youth access to it.
Okay, so put it in chemists and make it prescription only. What about that? Because that would mean it is only used as a cessation tool. Would you support that, given you are deeply concerned with it being used as a cessation tool rather than just a recreational one?
No, so Australia has a pharmacy-only model. They have the largest black market for vaping products in the Western world, and their youth vaping rates are higher than ours here in New Zealand. So the pharmacy model does not work. Education is lacking, and common sense around tackling the issue is lacking. And we have a knee-jerk response from a government who's struggling in the polls. That's what this is.
A survey of youth vaping, this is the ASHES survey, which I'm sure you're really familiar with. It shows around, more than 10% of 14-year-olds are daily users of vapes. How concerning is that to you?
It's incredibly concerning. And my question is, what is the education piece that's going to schools to support them in addressing this issue? I've spoken personally with my Southwood principals who had not received anything from the Ministry of Education or Ministry of Health on how to address this issue with their student bodies.
Why is it not? Why can't you see that there may be a connection with the proliferation of vape stores? We're talking about thousands of stores, including dairies, selling vapes, some of them very close to schools and marae, with obvious advertising and packaging that some people would argue are specifically appealing to a youth market. Whether they get them directly from you or second-hand from someone else, what responsibility does the vape industry take for their part in this?
The vaping industry has a responsibility to adhere to the regulations and the law. And large in part, like any industry in New Zealand, the vast majority of industry goers do so. There's always some immoral operators like there are in the liquor industry and other industries that are going to find a way to bend the rules or to sell products because they lack the moral compass to actually do what is supposed to be done for them. Sorry.
So with this proposal, Jonathan, the government would basically thousands of stores, right? Put them out of business. So stop selling vapes or you're out.
You're talking thousands of job losses and thousands of business closures. And that's the only thing the only real known result from this policy.
Okay,
is that
so
will be the
my
outcome.
question to you about that is, as an association, do you anticipate taking any kind of legal challenge around this?
We haven't had a discussion regarding that, so I can't comment on that.
So would you just sit back and allow that to happen?
We haven't had a chance to come together as an association to talk through the finer details, so I don't know.
Okay, so how should those stores be chosen, do you think? The ones that they're going to shut down? What should be the criteria for which ones they pick?
I have absolutely no idea, and I guess the only hope industry has, and I guess public health in terms of what we've been able to achieve and all the positives that we've achieved with reduction in smoking rates, is that this government won't be there come next year. There'll be a change in government, one that actually understands how to tackle the wider issue.
National supports these measures. They've come out today supporting these measures.
I haven't seen that. I can't comment on that. Sorry, I haven't seen National.
So your two major parties, which would make up part of a government, well, they both agree that there needs to be tighter regulation around vaping.
We agree that there needs to be tighter regulation around vaping. For 5 or 6 years now, we've been asking the government to put stricter penalties and tighter enforcement in place. There's been a complete lack of enforcement today. There's been warnings for breaches where stores have been caught selling to minors. They've been given a warning. They haven't even been fined. And there's been no appetite by the government to use their existing regulatory powers to remove non-compliant retail.
So they should take a harder line in enforcement?
Totally. They need to take a line in enforcement because to date they've done nothing.
Appreciate your time, Jonathan. That is Jonathan Devery, who's the Vaping Industry Association of New Zealand chair there. It is 26 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we're interested in your feedback on that. Vaping, should there be tighter regulation? How far should we go with it? The industry says it's a great cessation tool, but is that all it is being used for? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines. Little late, anea ana mina pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon says his party and ACT would have a constructive relationship if they formed a government, but he's ruled out supporting ACT's policies on changes to the Treaty of Waitangi and the Zero Carbon Act. He was speaking after the latest One News Varian political poll gave the National ACT bloc enough seats to lead, while Labour's support fell to 29%. The Green Party says the government hasn't done enough to stop forestry debris damaging land and roads in Te Tairawhiti, Gisborne. Co-leader Marama Davidson says more native planting is needed on the hills to keep the land stable. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says the government's committed to cleaning up slash, but the forestry sector should also be contributing. Schools have hired 84 attendance officers to help get more children to class. The government says regular attendance, defined as going to more than 90% of classes, is on track to meet the target of 70% next year. US President Joe Biden has paid tribute to the resilience of the people of Maui during a visit to parts of the Hawaiian island that were devastated by wildfires earlier this month. He promised the historic town of Lahaina would be rebuilt according to local wishes. At least 114 people died in the wildfires and 850 are still missing. And celebrations in Spain are expected to continue into the night after the return of the victorious Women's World Cup football team. The players had a rapturous welcome travelling through the capital Madrid on an open-top bus. And those are the headlines. Lisa.
Ngā mihi, Anna. Parents whose babies were murdered in hospital have sobbed quietly in court as the judge sentenced British neonatal nurse Lucy Letby to life in jail. The 33-year-old was convicted last week of killing 7 babies and attempting to kill 6 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital. World Watch's Charlie Drever compiled this report.
Cruel, callous and bordering sadism. That's how the judge who sentenced Lucy Letby described her offending. This is the moment Justice Goss at Manchester Crown Court made it clear Letby will spend the rest of her life behind bars.
You have coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing and sought to attribute some fault to others. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. In their totality, the offences of murder and attempted murder were of exceptionally high seriousness, and just punishment, according to law, requires a whole life order.
Between 2015 and 2016, Letby deliberately injected babies with air, force-fed others milk, and poisoned 2 infants with insulin. Among those at the sentencing were the families of the babies she killed, who wept quietly as victim impact statements were read. One mother says she will always remember the overwhelming emotion she felt from holding her newborn baby.
Lucy Letby, to think that you could get any kind of gratification from inflicting pain and from watching our suffering in the aftermath goes against everything I believe it is to be human. I'm horrified that someone so evil exists.
Noticeably absent was Letby herself, who refused to attend today's sentencing, something she is legally entitled to do. It's a move that's further shocked the country and prompted Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to call for a change to the law.
I think it's cowardly that people who commit such horrendous crimes do not face their victims and hear firsthand the impact that their crimes have had on them and their families and loved ones.
And while the sentencing may offer some closure to the families, many questions still linger. People want to know how this was able to happen in the first place and how Letby was able to continue attacking and killing babies for so long. BBC journalist Michael Buchanan has been closely covering the case. He told World Watch about the doctors who raised concerns about Letby early on.
In short, they weren't taken seriously by the hospital management at all. And it's certainly the feeling amongst some of the paediatricians, though not all, that the hospital leadership had taken their concerns more seriously earlier on, that it's possible that some of the babies who ended up dying may have survived.
The government has ordered an independent inquiry into the circumstances behind Letby's killing spree. As for her motives, there are some theories.
There was certainly a suggestion, which was hinted at in court, that she was trying to gain the attention of a more senior doctor in the unit. And there was a theory that perhaps she was one of the ways in which she was trying to gain his attention was by trying to prove to him how good she was at rescuing or resuscitating very, very poorly children.
Ultimately, only Lucy Letby knows why she committed her horrific crimes, something she will now have decades to reflect on from her prison cell.
US President Joe Biden is promising government support for Hawaii for as long as it is needed. He's witnessed firsthand the devastation left behind by this month's deadly wildfires. He and First Lady Jill Biden had a look at the affected areas in Maui, including the historic town of Lahaina.
I know the feeling that as many of the people in this town, this community, that hollow feeling you have in your chest like you're being sucked into a black hole, wondering, will I ever get by this? But I also want all of you to know the country grieves with you, stands with you, and will do everything possible to help you recover, rebuild, and respect culture and traditions when the rebuilding takes place.
At least 115 people have been killed and more than 800 are still missing. Meanwhile, the Maui fire chief has described the utter chaos when the fires took hold. CNN's Chelsea Davis has more.
It's difficult to describe how ferocious this fire was in Lahaina on August 8th. Maui Fire Chief Brad Ventura says unless you were there, you will never know.
The fire was spotting in structures over their heads. The way they described it to me was the fire moved so rapidly through the neighborhood that it was moving like a wildfire moving through grass, but it was burning structures.
Chief says many of his firefighters were trapped themselves. He says that no one gets left behind mentality, and training is the only reason they made it out alive.
The heat and the wind and the blockage of the roads at that time, you know, they're heroes for getting out of there. They are incredible individuals for just being able to keep their poise make the right decisions.
Chief, number 1 in command, wasn't on island that deadly afternoon. He was taking his daughter to college in Colorado, but booked a flight back home as soon as he could.
It was very tough to be away from our people. You know, especially during such a time of need.
Still emotional now? What's going through your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a close-knit community. We're a close-knit fire department. Nobody is unaffected by this. And just knowing that my firefighters are hurting is difficult.
2 fire engines are completely destroyed, and 15 firefighters lost their homes.
For our community, we hurt with you all the way through it. We have firefighters that grew up in Lahaina. They're multi-generational Lahaina families. Nobody in our department's unaffected. Nobody in our county is unaffected. And it's possible it's the same with the whole state.
Chief Ventura wants the people of Lahaina and the world to know that every single firefighter gave it everything they had.
It's 7 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Auckland Transport has opened the shed for a look at the electric ferries it's having built. Just last week, AT announced the end of several inner city routes because operator Fuller's 360 says it doesn't have the crew to staff them. From the 1st of October, Fuller's will no longer operate the Birkenhead, Te Onewa, Northcote Point and Bayswater routes. AT is scrambling now to find a new operator. In the meantime, it hopes its new boats will bring a sea change for ferry commuters. Reporter Finn Blackwell and camera operator Marika Habazi have this story.
Not yesterday's ferry. That's how Auckland Transport has described what will be a fleet of environmentally friendly vessels. 2 aluminium hybrid electric boats are being built in Whanganui with the ability to carry 300 passengers. And in Auckland, they're building 2 zero-emission electric boats, capable of carrying 200 commuters.
This boat is expected to hit the water next year for testing, while full passenger services will take place in 2025.
Chief Executive of EV Maritime, who were commissioned to build the boats, Michael Eglin, says the vessels are a big move in the push for zero emissions.
Really leaping into this move of electrification is a really significant thing for Auckland Transport to be doing. And I think both we and Auckland Transport are very grateful to central government for the role that they've played in that.
He says these new boats are built to outlast the older fleet, half of which are expected to reach the end of their life over the next 10 years.
I guess when you've been in the industry, as I have for 25 years, the idea of boats that you worked on in your career coming to end of life already makes you feel old. So we really believe in engineering out end of life in our products, and so to us, building that longevity into boats is a really important piece.
AT's program director for the low emission ferry program, Nathan Kamek, says the vessels will succeed where older ones have failed.
Looking at the kind of capacity, so when you turn up to a ferry terminal, you expect to be able to get on the boat, you expect to be able to get your bike onto the boat, and that's simply not the case at the moment. We've got some ferries which are just too small for their routes.
He says they're being lined up for some of the routes Fuller's has just pulled out of.
We haven't quite nailed down yet which operator will operate them and which routes they'll be on. What we do know is they're likely to be on one of the inner harbour or mid-harbour routes. So that's the likes of Hobsonville Point or Half Moon Bay, or Birkenhead, Bayswater, one of those type of routes.
Birkenhead and Bayswater are getting cut in October, meaning AT will need to find a new operator. Auckland councillor and chair of the council's transport committee, John Watson, says it's the perfect time to bring in someone new.
We're beyond the sell-by date now of bringing competition in, both in terms of building the craft. So we have some real expertise in New Zealand. We have the only builders of the only electric ferry in the Southern Hemisphere down in Wellington. We have people trying to get in to the market, trying to get in operations, and they've found that really difficult.
He wants significant improvements to the city's ferry network.
Latest announcement promises another 18 months of a reduced services, so that's going to be nearly 3 years. There's no public transport system in the world that can afford to function with that degree of cancellation.
He says the delays that come with Fuller's reduced services are simply not good enough.
Auckland is a maritime city, a proud city, has a proud maritime history. We should be doing a lot better than what we're doing at the moment, particularly with climate change imperatives. We should have ferries going to all parts of the Auckland region.
Commuters will be hoping alongside new ferries comes a service they can rely on.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, do check out the web version. There's some great video pictures there. You can see what we're talking about in terms of the ferries. A lot of you getting in touch around vaping in particular. Vaping, too little too late, says this person. Follow the Australian model. Lack of action has created a new problem unnecessarily. Most kids were not going to start smoking and now they have a potentially worse addiction to battle with. Tragic. My daughter and friends are now addicted. It is very hard to give up nicotine. Nikki says we need to tax the heck out of vapes. We have let down a whole generation. Shame on us. Biggest issue that schools have now. Someone else has said, can the nicotine content be removed or reduced to make vapes non-addictive? When the government brought in their initial changes in June, they they were reducing the maximum concentration of nicotine then. So they have reduced it. Whether it could be reduced further, that's be something we need to get an expert opinion on. Rosie says just as well marijuana wasn't legalised, well, the same situation would have arisen as has happened with vaping. Another says capping stores to 600 would be great, but how many more children will be addicted before this happens? These must be very profitable, says Frank. They are spreading like a rash. Another listener reckons vapes should be available on prescription only, and this seems imperative that dairies near schools and currently selling vape products must be prevented from continuing, in addition to new outlets near school. While Christopher Hipkins has said that they will stop existing stores being near marae and schools if they're in government after the election. This one in, leave us vapers alone. I started smoking at 13 and it was not a cherry flavoured cigarette.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. People had to be treated in ambulances outside Waikato Hospital in Hamilton last night after the emergency department was swamped with patients. St John issued a special declaration to keep ambulance services to the hospital operating late last night, its second such in a month. It prioritised getting the most urgent patients to ED while ensuring those waiting in ambulances had appropriate care. Te Whatu Ora Waikato says it reached 103% occupancy during the day yesterday, and by 6 p.m. there were 143 patients in the ED, one of the busiest periods it's experienced. Earlier this month, a provisional improvement notice was issued to Waikato Hospital's ED after concerns about unsafe staffing levels. An anti-smoking campaigner is blaming government inaction for a rapid rise in the number of children and teenagers vaping. Rules banning new stores from setting up near schools and reducing nicotine levels in vapes will come in next month. Labor is also campaigning to limit the number of vape stores nationwide and introduce a licensing regime for all retailers. Professor Boyd Swinburne from Health Coalition Aotearoa told Checkpoint the government's response has been sluggish.
There was a few years we didn't have any regulations on the books. Vape shops just sprouted up like mushrooms, and dairies cut themselves in half to be able to sell vapes because they have such a high profit margin. And so now we're having to deal with reversing that trend, which is much harder than having to prevent it in the first place.
Selling vapes to under 18-year-olds was only banned in 2020. National says it would have constructive relationships with ACT if both parties end up working together after the election. Labor has dropped to 29% in the latest One News Varian political poll, which also shows the right National ACT bloc could comfortably form the next government. It's prompted National's leader Christopher Luxon ruling out ACT's policy to repeal the Zero Carbon Act and throw cold water on its treaty principles policy. Mr Luxon says both parties work well together despite their differences.
I think it's going to be a constructive relationship and a constructive coalition. You know, we'll have differences on means by which we deliver goals, as every coalition government does in New Zealand under an MMP environment. But I think we'll be very constructive and very mature in working our way through those issues.
Labour leader Chris Hipkins says his party may have taken a hit from recent controversies, but it will run a vigorous election campaign. He's promising his party will fight back harder.
Look, I've only been 7 months in the job, and I acknowledge during that time I've had to deal with some really difficult issues. I'm looking forward to getting on the campaign trail and talking to New Zealanders about my vision for the future.
The government of Japan has given its stamp of approval for Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, to start releasing more than 1 million tonnes of treated nuclear wastewater into the Pacific Ocean this week. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has asked TEPCO to swiftly prepare for the water discharge. Lydia Lewis has the story.
The Prime Minister says the water release is expected to start on August 24th. All the while, Pacific leaders remain on the fence about the issue. The Melanesian Spearhead Group, or MSG, which is meeting in Port Vila, has been urged by Vanuatu's Foreign Minister to issue a statement requesting Japan scrap the release. On the other hand, former PIF chair and Fiji Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka says he's satisfied Japan's plan is safe after reading the UN Nuclear Agency's report.
Northland schools are using TV advertisements in fish and chip shops to encourage families to get their children back to class. The government says regular school attendance is improving thanks to more attendance officers and the Regional Response Fund targeting truancy. Northland attendance rates were hovering around 48% in the first term, but Tai Tokoro Principal Association President Pat Newman says schools are now hitting close to 90%. He says the ads and takeaway shops have a simple message.
Saying, hey, get back to school, it doesn't cost anything, you get free lunch, free this, you know what I mean, we're encouraging. The next one that we're looking at putting up is around if your kid's not at school, it's important that you ring in for the child's safety.
Pat Newman says the fund allows principals to use local initiatives to get children back into the class. Aucklanders are being asked to give their views on whether the council should have Māori seats on its governing body. The city has the largest Māori population in the country, but no seats representing Māori voters. Council is seeking comments on 3 options: a parliamentary one, which includes Māori wards, a royal commission one with 2 elected seats, and one appointed by mana whenua, and a new different model to be created. People can find feedback forms on local service centres or libraries. A Christchurch zoo says some farmyard animals have been seriously injured due to drivers doing skids and burnouts outside the zoo. Orana Wildlife Park spokesperson Nathan Hawke says the animals were inside their enclosure at the time. He says some have suffered serious cuts and bruising after being spooked by the noise and running into fences. He says it's left other animals stressed, which could affect their breeding.
These are really wide-ranging concerns. You know, some of the animals that we're privileged to hold are rather delicate little creatures. And so, the activity, unfortunately, is causing concern for us and very much animal welfare concerns for our lovely animals.
And police have identified 16 vehicles involved in offending and so far impounded 10. And one person is in a critical condition after a house fire in the central Hawke's Bay town of Waipukaro. Emergency services were called to Gaisford Terrace at 20 to 3 this afternoon. And that's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Mihingarangi Forbes, host of Mata. Tonight we talk to Shane Jones about New Zealand First's campaign to re-enter Parliament, their policies and priorities. Then we hear from commentators Tau Henare and Bernie O'Donnell. Nō reira, ariari taringa mai kia mata after the 6:30 headlines this evening on RNZ National or at rnz.co.nz/mata.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow for Northland, partly cloudy with isolated showers. Auckland to Kapiti, including the Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country, mostly fine with areas of morning frost. Chance of a shower in Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy with isolated showers from the Wairoa district northwards, clearing overnight, partly cloudy tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, fine spells increasing tomorrow. The South Island, excluding Fiordland and Stewart Island, mostly fine with morning frosts. Cloud increasing in Westland tomorrow evening. For Fiordland and Stewart Island, becoming cloudy this evening with drizzle or light rain developing tonight. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain clearing tonight and then some cloudy periods. RNZ National. It is 7 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Kia ora rā, Anna. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tropical storm Hillary is causing chaos in the United States. Floodwater and debris has trapped residents inside their homes in Cathedral City, California, as rescue teams work to clear roads. And in nearby Palm Springs, rescuers have been using bulldozers to carry people safely from floodwaters and thick mud. Millions remain under flood watch, and Hillary has shattered rainfall records in Southern California. CNN's Stephanie Elam filed this report.
Southern California facing unprecedented flooding.
Holy
violent mudslides, flash floods damaging roads and homes after bearing the brunt of Tropical Storm Hillary.
There's a lot of destruction.
Roads became rivers in the streets of Cathedral City overnight, and entire neighborhoods were submerged in nearby Palm Springs into the early morning. Piles of thick mud left behind from floodwaters, blanketing everything in sight. The mud inescapable for anyone attempting to get around.
We're absolutely telling people if they don't have to be out to stay in their homes. The roads, we're still assessing the damage and the places where there's still water and mud over the roads. We don't know how safe those are.
Jay Bublett spent the night into the morning rescuing drivers stuck on flooded and muddy roads. What kind of conditions were you seeing while you were out there?
Cars floating, and there was cars that roads almost washed out.
He echoed authorities' warnings to stay off the roads.
A lot of them are regretting that they tried to get across. Matter of fact, two had just saved over here. They have Dad's car, and Dad doesn't know it yet. So I'm guessing they're grounded. When you see water, you don't cross it.
The area around Palm Springs saw nearly a year's worth of rain in just 24 hours.
I spent a night on the roof of my truck.
911 lines saw outages overnight in a handful of cities. Downtown Los Angeles experienced the rainiest summer day on record going back more than 100 years.
Los Angeles was tested, but we came through it.
The Los Angeles Fire Department fielded more than 4,000 emergency calls on Sunday and responded to about 1,800 incidents.
We responded to a flooded intersection in Sun Valley where 5 vehicles were stranded.
Los Angeles public schools were closed on Monday while officials surveyed facilities for damage.
Take all those conditions into account. After careful consideration, we decided to shut down the schools. Right decision.
The Los Angeles Angels to play the Cincinnati Reds on Wednesday, postponing their home game because of the effect from the storm. So much rain in San Diego, a tower of water was seen erupting from a manhole today. The city saw its rainiest summer day in over 170 years, getting 10 times their average summer rainfall in just one day. The cleanup effort now the top priority. With Hillary continuing to move through the West, millions will still remain under flood watches from California to Idaho.
The victorious Spanish women's football team has arrived home to a jubilant welcome after winning the FIFA World Cup. Wearing their medals and carrying the trophy, players boarded the team bus, which received a police escort among cheering crowds in the streets of Madrid. The celebrations come as a row has erupted in Spain over one official who seemed to go too far as the team collected their medals. Spanish FA President Luis Rubiales gripped the head of star striker Jenny Hermosa and planted a big kiss directly on her lips. He has since apologised.
There is something I regret, and it was what happened between me and a player, with whom I have a fantastic relationship, just like with the others, where I have certainly made a mistake. I have to admit it. In that moment of absolute exultation, without any bad intentions or bad faith, well, that happened. I think in a very spontaneous way. I repeat, without bad faith. We didn't understand the controversy because we saw it as something natural, normal, and as I said, with no bad faith at all.
Many fans say it was deeply disrespectful as millions watched around the world. With more details, here's Sky Sports football journalist Semra Hunter from Barcelona.
A lot of backlash has gone his way. I think people are very embarrassed, quite frankly, by the behaviour of Luis Rubiales, who is the president of the federation. And it really has sparked an outrage, I think, in general across the board, so much so that politicians have even gotten involved and said, we demand that he explains his behaviour and we also demand an apology. There was no consent. She didn't consent to being kissed. And it's a boss kissing an employee. And not just that, but publicly, on the biggest stage. So yes, there was a huge amount of pressure for him to actually apologise. Otherwise, there was the thought that he would be pushed out of the job, that he would be forced to stand down, which obviously he doesn't want to do. A lot of people have been asking for him to be sacked. Hence why he twisted his arm in the end and came out with that, my opinion, half-baked apology.
Yeah, okay, that was Semra Hunter. A British serial killer who murdered 7 babies and tried to kill another 6 will spend her life in prison. 33-year-old neonatal nurse Lucy Letby refused to leave the court holding cells as she was sentenced, denying grieving parents a final chance to deliver their victim statements to her. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
A case that has horrified so many comes to an end. Killer nurse Lucy Letby will never see the outside world again after her sentence was handed down in court.
Lucy Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply.
Lucy Letby killed 7 babies and tried to kill another 6 at a hospital in northern England during a 13-month period from 2015. Several of the children who survived have been left with lifelong disabilities. Over a 10-month trial, the court heard how she would strike moments after being left alone with the infants. Judge James Goss called her actions a cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of child murder.
There was premeditation, calculation and cunning in your actions. You specifically targeted twins and latterly triplets. Some babies were healthy, others had medical issues of which you were aware.
Her motivation is known only to her. Prosecutors told the court Letby enjoyed playing God and was excited by the drama when doctors came rushing in to save the babies. She faced nearly 60 hours of questioning on the stand, but what compelled her to become Britain's worst child serial killer is still unclear.
A piece of paper with dent writing on both sides, setting out your thoughts and feelings, was found in the first search of your home in 2018. Amongst the phrases you wrote were, "The world is better off without me," and "I am evil, I did this."
Letby declined to leave her court cell during sentencing. The families of the victims say refusing to face them in court was one final insult. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says his government plans to change the law, forcing defendants to appear in the dock during sentencing.
I think it's cowardly that people who commit such horrendous crimes do not face their victims and hear firsthand the impact that their crimes have had on them and their families and loved ones. Now, we are looking and have been at changing the law to make sure that that happens, and that's something that we'll bring forward in due course.
An inquiry is underway to find out how hospital staff and management responded to the spike in deaths.
It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Cambodia will today usher in a new government and Prime Minister for the first time in almost 4 decades after ruling the country with an iron fist for 38 years. Hun Sen will hand over the reins to his son, Hun Manet. This follows an election that was widely described as undemocratic and a sham. The ABC's Lauren Day filed this report.
In a wooden shack in rural Cambodia, a computer-generated shooting star flies past a full moon, lighting up the sky as a perfect baby is born. That's the opening scene of an epic 52-episode biopic commissioned and partly written by Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen. It's a parting piece of propaganda before the 71-year-old hands over the reins to his son Hun Manet after an election the UN, US and EU said was neither free nor fair. For Cambodian-Australian Meng Hen Tek, who sits in the Victorian Parliament, today feels like a step backwards for Cambodia.
Cambodia now gone back to a one-party state, basically to a family dynasty.
With dissenters in the media quashed and the main opposition party banned, the Cambodian People's Party won in a landslide. And days later, Hun Sen announced that after 38 years, he'd hand the baton to his son, Hun Manet. Author of Seeking Justice in Cambodia, Sue Coffey, says that will mean more of the same.
Hun Manet will be no different from his father. His father has run a very dictatorial regime in Cambodia. It's a dictatorship. There's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of the press, no human rights and no democracy.
Hun Manet is not the only Cambodian politician following in his father's footsteps. The cabinet is littered with the sons and relatives of former MPs.
There'll be younger faces, and many of them are now taking up the roles of their fathers. But they've all grown up with this ruling elite in a very authoritarian regime, and there's nothing to suggest at all that they will change things.
Nally Paloj from Cambodian-based NGO Licado says the situation on the ground is bleak.
We are always at the bottom in terms of rule of law, independent media, independent judiciary. So those are not signs of democracy.
Human rights advocates are calling on Australia to speak out against the new regime and consider imposing sanctions. The Department of Foreign Affairs says Australia has expressed its serious concerns about the political environment in Cambodia and the conduct of the election, both publicly and privately. Meanwhile, Victorian Labor MP Meng Hen Tek says he and other members of the Cambodian diaspora here in Australia have been subjected to intimidation and threats by the regime for speaking out.
I think we have to scream out, we have to say in public and in closed door our strongest possible term that, Australia support open, free and fair democracy in Cambodia.
It's been alleged that Saudi border guards have systematically killed hundreds of Ethiopian migrants travelling northwards through Yemen. A report has been put together by the advocacy group Human Rights Watch, which is calling for a full independent investigation. The BBC's Paul Adams has been talking to some of the migrants who survived and witnessed horrendous treatment at the border.
Mustafa is full of regrets. It's been more than a year since he lost his left leg on Yemen's northern border. Rehabilitation has been a long, hard road. He's still haunted by what happened the night he tried to enter Saudi Arabia.
We got shot at while we were walking. Immediately, we all lie down on the ground. For about 5 minutes, I didn't even realize I was shot. But when I tried to get up and walk, part of my leg wasn't there. The shooting went on and on and on.
Yemen's rugged, remote mountains. Huge numbers of people on the move, fleeing poverty and war at home, seeking opportunity in neighbouring Saudi Arabia. Some of the migrants filmed their own epic, dangerous journeys. And among the videos shared on social media, evidence of death and trauma. Bodies lying in a rocky riverbed. A hasty burial high on the mountainside. And now a shocking allegation that Saudi Arabian soldiers are killing hundreds of migrants.
In Australia, there are calls for a national review of hearing services after negligence affecting children in two states. Children in Queensland and South Australia have had their cochlear implants poorly programmed, potentially leading to lifelong developmental delays. Here's the ABC's Annie Guest.
Early treatment with cochlear implants can help deaf babies catch up on delayed development. So Deborah Swan from Deaf Australia is devastated for families who say their worries were dismissed. She's speaking here through an Auslan interpreter.
I can only imagine what stresses these families would have endured in trying to provide communication to their children.
A review has found at least 30 children with incorrectly programmed cochlear implants. after problems with processes and training at Adelaide's Women's and Children's Hospital dating back to 2006. The state's Premier, Peter Malinowskis, immediately committed to implement all 59 recommendations.
This is a bigger error one could possibly imagine. It's awful. It's really quite sad.
He's promised the SA government will pay each family $50,000 and assist them to resolve compensation and determine the best care pathway. About 15 of the families are represented by lawyer Peter Jackson, who says while they welcome the payment, it's not enough.
If you're 1 or 2 years of age, you can actually catch up pretty quickly to other children of your age because the mind is so flexible. But unfortunately, these children in some cases have been left 5+ years without proper settings, and as a result of that, they're just so far behind their peers now that it's just going to be very difficult for any of them to catch up. So it's going to affect them long term with respect to their ability to live in the community, to work, etc.
He's suing the state on behalf of each child, some of whom speak only 1 or 2 words at around age 6.
These families are very upset, and then to find out that this has all been caused by essentially a monumental stuff-up in the system has just, I guess, rubbed salt into wound at the end of the day and made a lot of them very angry.
A new artificial intelligence tool can reveal how much your heart may have aged prematurely because of a lack of exercise, a poor diet, drinking or smoking. It's hoped its development will help find ways to reduce the risks of many age-related conditions, such as strokes. The BBC's science correspondent, Palab Ghosh, had his heart assessed by the new tool.
Doctors know that your heart can age prematurely compared to the rest of your body if you lead an unhealthy lifestyle. For example, a 50-year-old person can have the heart of a typical 60-year-old if they smoke and don't exercise enough. But even cardiac specialists can't tell how much damage has been done by looking at a scan. Now, researchers at the London Institute of Medical Science have developed a software tool that uses artificial intelligence to analyse scans that reveals exactly how much the heart has aged. I was invited to try it out.
Please resume breathing.
The first step is to have an MRI scan after some gentle exercise. The scientists record pictures of my beating heart and the movement of my blood vessels. This is compared with completely healthy hearts of 5,000 people of varying ages. An hour later, and I'm given the answer. I'm 61, but how old is my heart?
It says that your heart age is 63.
Oh, well, that's a bit older than I actually am. So how does that figure? What should I do?
Exercising enough, watching your weight, smoking and so on. And of course, we're interested in looking at treatments that might slow down ageing or might reduce the effects of ageing. And these sorts of scans can quantify that and see how effective those treatments might be in the future.
A first step is to compare the genetic differences between those whose hearts have aged prematurely with those that haven't. This could help researchers to develop treatments that target these mechanisms and help people to live longer, healthier lives.
A group of school children from outback New South Wales has had a chance to perform on stage with an Australian rock legend. The kids travelled for hours to the Mundi Music Festival to perform alongside the former frontman of the Man Goanna, Shane Howard. The ABC's Bill Ormond has more.
More than 40 years on and the iconic solid rock is still playing. The song charts Indigenous history, land rights and the arrival of European settlers. 40 kilometres west of Broken Hill on the wide open plains of Mundi, the song echoes out.
Out here nothing changes, not in a hurry anyway.
But unlike the original, Shane Howard has a large group of backup singers. He's accompanied by 30 kids from some of the most remote schools in New South Wales.
I've done lots of songwriting workshops with kids all over the country. In another life, I trained as a primary teacher, so it feels kind of second nature to me.
Appearing on stage at a music festival with roughly 12,000 attendees is a thrill for the kids. 9-year-old Zaylee Lawson travelled hundreds of kilometres from Wilcannia to sing. She was most excited to be able to perform one of the songs written with her peers from Menindee, Wentworth and Broken Hill in the Aboriginal dialect of Barkindji.
Some of the songs are really about culture and exploring the world and showing people who we really are and giving people other chances to show who they really are.
12-year-old Deshana Newman from Alma Public School in Broken Hill says it was a great opportunity to connect with kids from all across the region.
I get to socialise with other people from other schools and meet new friends and stuff like that.
The former Goanna frontman practiced with the kids in the lead up to their performance and says it was wonderful to watch.
Where you see the future that's coming, and First Nations and non-Indigenous children working together, and how easily they do that. And song is, my dad used to say it's the international language, and it's so true. Music is this great binding force that brings us all together. And it's amazing all these years later that Solid Rock, 40 years later, is still doing that, being able to bring people together.
The collaboration is part of the Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation's program Subtext for students in regional and remote areas. For Shane Howard, that's what it's all been about.
Music and education, they're powerful compatriots, really. So, yeah, it's a really lovely thing to do, and to work with kids and to see both Indigenous and non-Indigenous children working together like this, sharing language, sharing culture, sharing stories, working together. It's very beautiful. They're the future.
An absolute flood of feedback on vaping, so let's get to some of it before we head off. This listener says, I work with taiohi, so teenagers or adolescents between 13 and 18, and vaping is a massive barrier to engagement and participation, as our service is oahe kore, smoke-free. I would love some strategies for supporting our nicotine-addicted young people as classic. Nicotine replacement therapy doesn't cut it. Glenn says, it is simply astonishing that the government has let a whole new generation of people, especially children, become addicted to nicotine. The tobacco companies are laughing all the way to the bank. And this one, if New Zealand can survive with only 900 pharmacies, then I'm sure the 8% of smokers who want to buy vapes to quit smoking will cope with 600 vape shops. Put our kids first over profit of big tobacco, who are fighting for replacement smokers. That from Anna from Christchurch, and someone else says, let's just go straight to a ban on vapes. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First upper in the ring with a teenage kickboxing sensation ready to take on the world. Set your alarm, get up for that one, brew a lovely coffee, sit back and relax and listen in. 5 a.m. First up. And then we'll be back a little later in the day. Catch you then.
Thanks, Lisa. Looking at the 6:30 headlines, the government's planning new laws to stop children and teenagers vaping. But Professor Boyd Swinburne from Health Coalition Aotearoa told Checkpoint it's government inaction that's led to the rapid rise in the habit. National says it would have a constructive relationship with ACT if both parties end up working together after the election, which a new poll predicts would happen. Japan says 1 million tonnes of treated radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant will be released into the Pacific Ocean from Thursday. And Northland schools are using TV advertisements and fish and chip shops to get their children back to class. It's helped get attendance rates from around 48% to close to 90%. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather at 7.
Tomorrow after 1pm on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan, New Zealand Poet Laureate Chris Teese joins us on Bookmarks to talk about his favourite books, music and movies. Plus, Dave Snowden, a visiting expert in complexity. He developed the famous Syneven framework to help organisations make big decisions. And what does it take for a small bed and breakfast to win a Gold Sustainability Award? Louise from Aston Road Villa talks about the hours of hard work it took to get there from 1pm on RNZ National.
And it is time now for Mata, hosted by Mihinarangi Forbes, bringing you the latest on politics with a range of Māori commentators and newsmakers. Today, Shane Jones outlines New Zealand First's campaign to re-enter Parliament, their policies and priorities, including their controversial transgender toilet policy. Then we hear from commentators Tau Henare and Bernie O'Donnell. Here's Mata.
Nau mai ki te mata I whera nei I te whānuitanga o ngā kōrero o te wā I pā oro ana I te motu. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihi Ngārangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai Pāho and the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Later we'll talk to commentators Tau Henare and Bernie O'Donnell, but first I'm joined in studio by New Zealand First candidate and the former Minister for Regional Economic Development, Shane Jones. Now New Zealand First's campaign slogan, Take Back Our Country, is focused on 5 key issues: taking a stand against racist separatism, fighting Australian-owned banks and the supermarket duopoly, investing in health, social services and crime prevention, tax reform and taking on the gangs. They're also promising to ban trans women from women's toilets and to make English an official language of Aotearoa New Zealand. Tēnā koe, Shane, nau mai hara mai.
Kia ora. Good to be back.
Ka pai, I te tuatahi ko hinga Dan Mihaka. Dan Mihaka has passed. Do you have a reflection, a kōrero about Dan?
We first encountered Dun when we were at St. Stephen's School. Dame Whina brought the Matakite March in 1975, I think it was, to Tipene, and Dun Mihaka was a part of that, and then he set off and led his own splinter march around to Tairāwhiti through the east coast. And obviously we all knew him through Waitangi, and the Mihakas are a famous whānau from Te Uri Taniwha, the people around Ohaiwai, near Kaikohe. So, nui no atu te mihi ki tēnei tōtara, he roto I te whare tapu o ngā pohi kua hinga. Aha ko ngā mākenutanga, aha ko ngā tutukitanga, e moi e Dan moi o te atu e.
Tēnā koe, I certainly remember him turning up at Parliament through the late 90s and early 2000s, with his different taki here and there. And I also remember you in Te Kawariki on the treaty grounds when I first started calling for the government to honour the treaty, whakamana I te reo Māori me e rā huatanga. What do you think your 25-year-old self would say about your policies today?
I think our saying was whakatutukitia ngā wawato te treaty, which meant give effect to the aspirations of the treaty. And there were 4 of us, Massey Nathan, Joanne Faulkner, Hinemore Puriri and myself, who led a wee petition in 1978. In fact, that petition caused me to be chucked off the Governor-General's residence, I think, with Dun Mihaka some years later with Joe Williams skulking around the side. I think a lot of what we set out to achieve in respect of the treaty has been delivered upon. And where I've ended up parting company is the way in which the treaty has been, I feel, unhinged from its moorings. And now it's used as a justification for every inequity that befalls us as a people. And I genuinely feel that with the ideological fervour driving for co-governance, it has the capacity to weaken our status as a nation. And I genuinely feel that New Zealand not only has some big internal challenges, but we've got the potential Sino-American adversarialism in the Pacific. And I'm very worried about internal bickering, undermining our capacity and our robustness as a nation.
What about some of those actual inequities, though? How do we address those? They're not being addressed, and they haven't been addressed for decades and decades, if not a century. So you're talking about, the new kind of stuff you're talking about, but what about the actual true inequities?
Without a doubt, if you look at truancy and the ongoing prison statistics, these seem like a historical...
Life expectancy.
Yeah, and even teenage pregnancies, the mortality rate. I don't think you can necessarily expedite addressing them just by invoking the treaty. And what's really annoyed me is that the quality of the output and the content of the policy has not matched the rhetoric of the treaty over the last 3 years.
So what's your solution to health inequities? Just let's use that as an example.
The best solution is frontline. And so I'm a great supporter of diverse delivery of frontline services. If you want to deal with whether or not it's diabetes, whether or not it's kids not going to school.
So what is diverse delivery? What's diverse delivery?
Well, if you've got, as is in the case of Kaitaia, we've got Te Heku Health, Hone Harawiru has set up a service. Those services, if
so
they're
Māori-specific services?
Well, those ones in Kaitaia, they service everyone. And I would say in an area like Northland...
They're Māori services, and that's what's the key to them, because Māori feel comfortable to come to them, and they have relationships.
But if you judge the quality of the service based on the outcome, that's positive. But if you pretend by invoking the name of the treaty and dredging up yet more tribunal reports, you're going to improve the quality of frontline service. I thoroughly disagree with that. Frontline service is when you can change the lives of people so that they make choices themselves to take and do better things with their lives. And you can have 1,000 million Waitangi Tribunal reports, which is why I've become very cynical about the Waitangi Tribunal.
Isn't the point of settlements, though, is that Māori can take care of themselves?
Yeah, the property rights settlements, of which I was a part, are something that is an important feature of our New Zealand history. But know this from me, I am never going to agree with the new type of claims. Number one, a separate tax system for te iwi Māori. Number two, self-governance. Number three, creating democracy in the vein of co-governance.
I'm just talking about the fundamental ability to be healthy and the life expectancy between Māori, and it's still at 7.8 for a Māori male. So, and we just talked about that delivery service, and I think we're on the same page. Is that those Māori organisations are working?
I think we're a parted company with some of the more shrill voices. Is that I know there's need there. I'm a part of that need. I've been very ill myself. But I've become very cynical for a small group who are invoking and dragging the treaty through legislation and pretending just by popping it into legislation we're going to improve the prospects of a working class or beneficiary class whānau in Moerewa. That's rubbish.
I just want to move on. It's been a week of policy announcements for New Zealand First, and one of them has been a policy around the toilets. So talk me through the toilet policy.
Well, it's less about toilets and it's more about what has happened to womanhood in New Zealand. And I'm surprised that women themselves have allowed this virus and this narrative of trans rights to essentially trump womanhood.
So you were actually in a party with Georgina Bayer, the first transgender politician. Did you express these concerns that you had to her back then? What do you think she would say about your toilet policy?
Dover and I knew Georgina very well. I don't ever recall Georgina calling for males to join female rugby teams or female sports teams or female Olympic teams.
Where would you like Georgina to have gone to the toilet at Parliament? With you in Winston?
Well, I've no recollection of Georgina ever raising those kinds of issues for us. What Winston
wasn't an issue for her because she was able to use the female
what Winston
toilet.
is saying, we have allowed critical gender theory to become so central and so paramount that, in my view, I'm not going to waste any of my political effort on that particular issue that afflicts maybe or impacts less than 1% of the population. I'm here to deal with more fundamental issues that are going to change the course of the nation.
Why have you got a toilet policy there if you're here to deal with other issues?
We're responding.
And it might be 1% of the population, but it's one of the population who has the highest, they're most at risk, they have the highest suicide policy, and you are preventing them from feeling safe.
Well, let's just agree to disagree. There's no shortage of people who have said to us that this is an issue that needs to be ventilated.
And the boys' toilets, Georgie, and the rest of you. What's wrong with bilingual names? That's another. You want to make the English language an official language, and you want to get rid of all the bilingual names.
I said earlier that the frequency and ubiquity of which the language has been deployed and appended to all sorts of policies like Three Waters or even the new water regulator. But Mihi, I say to you, there is no corresponding improvement in the content or the quality of the service. And I actually feel that it is tokenism. I personally no longer care what is the name of an organisation, and so many of our government organisations do have new names, but I want to know what the impact is. Is it going to help people make money? Is it going to cause the economy to become more productive rather than have a debate about the names?
Your boss, Mr. Peters, says it's not really an attack on the language. It's instead he's pointing out a group of conceited, conniving cultural cabal. Who are these conceited, conniving people? Can you name some?
I dare say he's referring to the small group who genuinely believe, and they're entitled to these beliefs in New Zealand, that if we festoon more of our Māori names, presumably they're in the bureaucracy. Since I've been unemployed as a politician for 3 years, I don't know who they are and what they've done.
They're elite, self-appointed, self-opinionated, whose purpose is the destruction of our cultural inheritance.
Maybe he's talking about John Key when he and the ACT Party and Dr. Sharple signed up the United Nations.
He's talking about real snobs. Do you know any? You reckon you know any? Cultural conceited cabals?
I tell you what I do know. The frequent and ubiquitous usage of our language by people who probably don't even speak our language, and giving it an identity which is not reflective of its capacity to service not only Māori but the broader situation.
Do you really think that's who he's talking about? People who don't even speak?
I presume it is. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of faceless bureaucrats, as we learnt during the COVID experience, and they're unaccountable.
When he says cultural inheritance is being destroyed, can you name one cultural inheritance that's been destroyed by te reo?
Well, I think what he's responding to, and I get it a lot when I'm campaigning, whether you like it or not, there are a whole lot of folk in New Zealand, and they're probably my age up, that they just can't cope and they don't understand bilingualism, or they don't understand the language. Now, we may make fun of them and we may call them irrelevant, but they vote. And they're entitled to express and have these anxieties. And we just work these things through, rather than constantly trashing them, because I remind you, nigh on 1 in every 5 New Zealanders is 65 and older, and they all vote.
Is that who you're taking the country back for?
No, they're entitled to reflect and express whatever anxieties they've got, just as the rangatahi expressed them.
Who are you taking the country back from?
So what we're doing with that slogan, which proved to be not too dissimilar than what Mr. Luxon is saying, what we're doing is recovering foundational influences. And if you want to change the constitutional character of New Zealand, and I accept through the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights, people do want to.
Like the treaty?
Pardon?
Like the treaty?
No, for example, co-governance. Okay, let's just take that concept. And I agree that it comes from UNDRIP. If that's what you want, go and campaign on it. Don't sneak it through, for example, through the Three Waters legislation that Nanaia introduced, which was never campaigned on. If you want a contest of ideas, go and get people to vote for it. I'm not voting for it.
Some news platforms have dug into some of the candidates on your list, and they've been described as weird and wacky beliefs. New Zealand First has been described as a coalition of the disaffected. So I looked at your Whangaparaoa candidates. Her former party believed in chemtrails and cloud seeding. So for the record, does New Zealand First believe that climate change is real?
Well, what New Zealand First believes that each candidate brings with them a whole host of background experiences. Those candidates, in their view, they suffered through the autocracy of the state that was evident during COVID.
Yes.
And they are absolutely entitled to rail against the overreach of the bureaucracy and the state during the COVID experience. But on climate change,
is it real?
Well, we need to stop talking. We need to stop the shrill, inflammatory language about climate change and focus on climate adaptation. For example, if climate change is so real and urgent, why has the law not changed to simplify and expedite the delivery of remedies to climate change, such as more clean, green energy, which you won't get? For example, the Windshaw farm that the Cullen Fund is hoping to have in Taranaki, they won't get that off the ground 5 to 8 years unless the law's changed. No party wants to change the law, therefore the urgency of climate change can't be real.
Okay, so it's not real? The urgency of it. Because you were the $1 billion tree minister, right?
Yeah. So that's climate change dealt with through adaptation.
That's right, but it's not enough. Do you believe it's enough? Do you believe that we have
to respond to
polluters?
Of course, we've got to respond to volatile weather, and volatile weather is El Nino, La Nina, the changing fortunes of climate. But I don't buy into this notion that we've got to hollow out the economy, close down industries to save the climate. No, first we save ourselves.
Okay, well, my last question to you is, does New Zealand support free dental care?
Sorry?
Free dental care, it's been thrown around.
Oh, yeah. If I open my mouth widely enough, you'll see I needed it when I was young. Dental care has been a key feature of our policy for a long time.
How will you wind it in?
The problem I see is we no longer have both the trained personnel and there's no longer an accent. For example, when I went to school, dental care actually was a main feature of being at school at Awanui. And I think it's not only education,